It's been 8 weeks since the OceanGate sub imploded at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, and the real story is way weirder than you think. Because on June 18th, 2023, the Titan submersible carrying Hamish Harding, Stockton Rush, Shahzada, and Suleiman Dawood, and P.H. Nargile descended to the remains of the Titanic in this. And this thing was made out of steel end caps that were glued to a carbon fiber hull, something that is never supposed to be done with deep sea submersibles.
And I've broken some rules to make this. I think I've broken them with logic and good engineering behind me.
Engineers and experts have pointed out since this disaster that the doomed sub was on its 5th trip down to the Titanic wreckage. And with each descent, the carbon fiber hull likely weakened further and further until finally, on its 5th voyage, it failed completely. And that weakening likely began at the points where the carbon fiber hull had been glued to the steel end caps. And all of this happened because Stockton Rush, the founder of OceanGate and the designer of the Titan, cut corners to reduce costs and to pose as a technological innovator. Because the weird thing about all of this is the technology to descend to that depth and beyond exists, and it's already been perfected. Because here's the thing, the Titanic wreckage is 2.5 miles beneath the ocean's surface. But submersibles have made it much deeper, safely. James Cameron, who actually directed the movie Titanic, descended 6.8 miles below the surface of the ocean in the deep sea Challenger submersible, which holds the world record for deepest dive. And in fact, Stockton's design was called out by one of his safety engineers back in 2018, as this employee raised concerns over the structural integrity of the vessel. And rather than getting a raise and a pat on the back for doing a good job at his job, Stockton Rush fired this employee and went on to sue him. And the issues with the sub go beyond the carbon fiber hull being glued to the steel end caps, because carbon fiber is manufactured through a process where small carbon fiber strands are woven together and set up and hardened with a resin and carbon fiber. While very light and strong as a material, it flexes and responds to stress differently than steel does, which makes it a terrible material to use for a deep sea submersible. The Titan sub likely experienced non-linear stress distributions and distortions throughout its hull with every dive, weakening it every time it went below the surface of the ocean. Now, the crazy thing about this is Stockton Rush was aware of this. So aware, in fact, that within the structure of the hull, he installed an RTM, or real-time monitoring system, that would issue an alert if it sensed that the hull was under significant stress. And that's exactly what we think happened with the Titan sub, and this is how it all played out. We have unconfirmed leaked logs from the mothership, the Polar Prince, and the Titan on its doomed voyage. The Titan had been descending normally for 96 minutes when the first issues began to arise. At 9:28:16, the Titan says, "We're noting an alarm from the RTM, the real-time monitoring system that Stockton Rush had installed in the hull, reducing velocity descent depth to 3,433 meters. At this point, they're 1.2 miles beneath the surface of the ocean. For perspective, this 1/12th scale model of the sub that I 3D printed, if this represents the actual size of the Titan, and this drone represents the mothership, the Polar Prince, this is how far beneath the surface of the ocean the Titan was when things started to go wrong. At 9:28:47, the Polar Prince says,
"Understood, do you need to ascend?"
At 9:30:55, the Titan says, "No change with thrust, the rate of descent is increasing. At 35, going to release the ballast now, stand by."
"Yes, agreed, release the ballast."
At 9:32:12, the Titan responds, "No improvement, preparing to jettison the frame."
"Affirmative, update when able. RTM indicator status?"
"Frame jettisoned, multiple attempts needed, but starting the ascent now." So while the Titan was down there, it seems like there were multiple initial attempts to release the ballasts and the frame that failed, and this is confusing when we read the logs, and the Polar Prince also seemed confused by this detail in communication. And we can see this in the logs. The Polar Prince says,
"Multiple attempts, what's your status? RTM indicators, depth, update please when able."
At 9:38:44, again, Polar Prince,
"Can you identify source? RTM indicator status."
The Titan has been silent for over 4 minutes at this point. And then finally, they respond. At 9:40:12, the Titan says negative.
"RTM status."
At 9:42:12, the Titan responds with this: "Trying to run diagnostics, ascending now, but very slow. Sounds have subsided. Global RTM alert active, all red." At this point, the souls on the Titan have been listening to the hull crackle, pop, and stress all while their internal systems are flashing red. At 9:42:57, the Polar Prince says,
Understood. Any codes, depth, ascent rate. Updates when able, please.
Titan responds, slow ascent in progress, quarter predicted, unclear why rate is small, no indicator, at 3476, aiming for the surface. The Titan at this point had released its ballasts and its frame, and was presumably using its thrusters to try to ascend to the surface, but the vessel was essentially neutrally buoyant, and the rate was extremely slow. Only 43 feet every 15 minutes. And then we get the last communications between the mothership and the Titan. Polar Prince at 9:44:03.
We're talking it over with the engineer. Stand by. Depth and status, please. What's the wattage on upwards thrust?
Titan at 9:46:37. Its final transmission. Reading red on the A power bus. I switched to B at 3457 meters. More sounds aft. The Titan indicates that there are more noises coming from the failing hull. And that's the last communication that we have from the Titan. Because in the 20 minutes that spanned during this communication period, the Titan had only risen 23 meters, or 75 feet towards the surface. And they'd been using their thrusters to make that ascent, consuming power that wasn't designed to be used to drive to the surface, because releasing the ballast and releasing the frame hadn't worked. And those thrusters eventually drained all power from the vessel, where experts think the sub finally went totally dark before pitching forward, throwing all crew members towards the front porthole section of the sub as it entered a freefall dive for over 900 meters, or a half mile before it finally imploded. Now here's where things get really crazy. First is what happened to the crew. They were conscious during this entire freefall, and they endured a half-mile freefall descent into the depths of the Atlantic Ocean in the pitch black, all the while hearing cracks and failing within the carbon fiber hull. So for over a minute, the crew was experiencing pure terror as they descended to what they knew would be their doom. And then, nothing. Because at the depth that the Titan was at, experts and physicists have said that the crew members, in fractions of a second, went from being in a state of biology to being in a state of physics, meaning that their bodies in a fraction of a second were literally reduced to particulate matter, because the pressure at that depth would have literally vaporized any biological elements within the hull capsule in milliseconds. But the really strange thing about the whole Titan story is that both the Navy and the Coast Guard picked up the sound of the implosion on their underwater monitoring devices, and they were able to communicate with the Polar Prince directly. So all of the decision makers surrounding this disaster knew, as soon as the sub had imploded, that all 5 members on board and the sub were lost. Yet the Coast Guard and the United States government allowed the media, or maybe worked with the media, to run with this wild narrative that had the entire world glued to their seats, which was this premise that there were 5 men trapped at the bottom of the Atlantic in a submersible running out of oxygen who needed to be rescued. And rescue efforts were deployed. Millions of dollars in resources and funds were expended searching for and trying to save a crew that had already been confirmed as lost. Everyone involved with that rescue operation at the top knew those people were gone. And the question that still remains to be answered is why. So what do you think?